Hello? All right, hopefully everybody can hear me. Let me check. Hello? All right. All right, so I hope everybody enjoyed the movie tonight. This has been one of my pet projects for probably like the last 4 years. I've been wanting to host the Jackie Robinson story, and I got lucky last year. Actually, last year yesterday was my anniversary when um, John Rios had picked me to co-host Cemetery Cinema with Dr. Dredd. Now, or Dr. Dredd, with Dr. Dredd, not Dr. Dre. But um, but the story of Jackie Robinson and my progression to how I came about to being a Negro League historian has a lot of things going along with it. Um, Growing up in Darby Borough at the time in the '70s, there was a lot of discrimination and racism, and it was funny because it always seemed that the adults were practicing that, whereas us kids, we had a good time. And I played in Darby Little League, which at the time, oh, my eyes are killing me, allergies. Ugh. America's pastime played outside, and my eyes are killing me. But at but at the time, Darby Little League was one of the largest little leagues in America, and they would have 500 kids out there, and it was just people from Darby, right? And a funny story I'll tell you in a little bit. But we would have like 500 kids, black, white, Asian, and we all played baseball together, right? Now, I was not a very good baseball player. I caught for a while, I pitched once, but mainly I was out in the outfield. But I loved the game. I always did. And I loved the game so much that actually I worked for the Phillies from '85 to middle of '93. And don't you know, right after I left, they went to the World Series. Right? I'm like the black cat. But I wanted to go on and go with the Jackie Robinson story because it not only tells the story of how baseball is in America and how up until I'd say probably about 15 years, maybe 20 years ago, baseball was the sport. And in a lot of towns, baseball is the major sport. The NFL has pretty much taken over sport in America today. In Philadelphia, even though the Phillies are number two, the Eagles are always number one. That wasn't like that in the '70s. In the '70s, growing up, baseball was the king sport, and so I grew up loving it. And like I wasn't very good at it, but I enjoyed playing. And I actually played up until I was 15. I played on a traveling team that they had, and basically I was, the bat boy, even though I did play a couple games on the team. Um, but baseball was something I enjoyed. And when I was younger, we would hear rumors and people would talk about, that Darby had a Negro League team, but I never knew the how much it actually meant to the black community in Darby. And Darby is one of those towns that in the '70s, right, it was half white and half black, and then you had your white neighborhood and you had your black neighborhood, right? And it was just the way it was. The neighborhood I grew up in was mainly like Irish and Italian, and everybody in the neighborhood, we all got along, right? But it was always there was always that separation, and it was always the adults, which was always I always thought was kind of funny because you figure you get old enough, you grow up, you mature, and you learn how to deal with everybody, and that the racism was was prominent. So But in 1980, I think it was like 81 or 82, Darby Borough celebrated their 300th anniversary. Now, Darby Borough is this historic town um, in outside the Philadelphia area, and Darby Borough always had like a large black community, and it was just just the way it was. I mean, there was nothing wrong either way, and the black community always was very proud, and they always stuck together. They were it was they Darby at the time. The black families, they were all very religious. I remember I was an older boy back in the day, and I would always take the early Easter mass so I can get home and well, I would get home, and then by the time I got home, like my mom, my dad, and my sisters, they were going out to mass. I got to stay home and hang out and chomp on all the candy while they were at mass. But they would always have a sunrise service. This one black church, and I would all and I whenever I would leave to go, it was probably like 3-4 years in a row. I would always see when they would have the sunrise service, and I would take my time as I was riding my bike on the way to church, past this service, and I always thought it was because when you're Catholic, right, you only know Catholic, you only go to the Catholic Church, you never go anywhere else growing up, and it was neat to see how other people worshipped. But in 82 or 83, when they had the Darby Tricentennial, they had a booklet, and in the booklet, it talked about the Hilldales, right? And I remember reading it, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. There was a team, right, blah, 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 blah. And I never really read it deeply enough to realize that at that time they had somebody in the Hall of Fame. His name was Judy Johnson. He actually played for the Hilldales, and then he ended up working in the Phillies organization for years, right? And I'm like, I didn't know that. So it comes up until 1999, and I work for a company that owns hospitals throughout the country, and I was in Kansas City. And when I was in Kansas City, I was driving around town because when you travel for work, right? What's the one thing you want to do? You want to do something that you can't do in your hometown. So I was riding around. I saw that they had a jazz museum. I'm like, that seems kind of cool. I'll go in and see that. And when I went into this jazz museum, right next door was the Negro League baseball museum, right? And I'm like, let me go in and see that. That'd be kind of cool, being I'm a huge baseball fan. And when I went in there, I'm walking around, and I was like, this is really cool, right? I was finding out about the teams. I knew about the Hilldales. I didn't really know that they were, in a major league for the Negro Leagues. And then the fact that the Eastern Color League was actually formed in, at the kitchen table of Ed Bolden's house I think he lived on 9th Street in Darby, So, I mean, that was a pretty big deal. So when I went to the museum and I'm looking around, right, and I'm talking to one of the curators in the museum, right, it was me and a young lady and her son were in there, and they were from Kansas City. And I was talking to the one guy, and he goes, where are you from? So I'm from a place called Darby Borough, Pennsylvania. He goes, Darby Borough, home of the Hilldales. I'm like, yeah, they're pretty cool. And he started rattling off all these things about the team, right, about how they and the Kansas City Monarchs were the two powerhouses in the 20s. Now, remember, in the 20s, right, baseball, it was all Yankees, right, especially the 27 Yankees, which was, they say is the greatest team ever to play, right? Well, if you took the best players from the Hilldales and the Monarchs, right, they would have beat the Yankees. And I'm not saying that because, I'm a Negro League historian and I'm a big Hilldale fan. I'm saying that because that's true. That would have happened, right? And the Hilldales actually barnstormed and played players. They actually played the Phillies. It was the Phillies, wasn't the A's. And they were beating them so bad that the coach took the Phillies off the field and left. That's how bad it was because, they were that good. Okay. And the Hilldales, I mean, they started off in 1910 as it was just a minor league team. They had kids on it, right? And as the team grew and they got better, they actually put stands up on the field. Now, where the stadium used to be it's a shopping center, right? And for years it was an Acme, right, or Super Saver, which was an Acme spinoff, and not Acme like the Wild Coyote Acme, right? But it was an Acme store, and no one really knew anything about it. And it was just funny that when I was talking to this guy, he had said to me, he goes, "Do you know that the Hilldales were one of the greatest teams to ever play in the Negro Leagues?" And I was blown away. I just did not know that at the time. And I was like, you know what? They deserve to be recognized. So I have a really good friend of mine. He's one of my best friends. His name is Joseph Sant'Ilguido. And at the time, he was working for the Delaware County Daily Times. Now, in our area, Delaware County is right outside of Philadelphia. And Delaware County Daily Times was like a pretty big paper. I mean, back in the day when people actually read newspapers. And he wrote an article, right, talking about, I went down there and I think it'd be a cool idea if they got recognized, a historic marker, all that kind of stuff. And it all died out. I had written the Phillies and I had written a bunch of different places, and it all kind of died out. And then a few years later, right, by this time I'm married, I got a couple kids, and it came up again. And I was talking to my friend Joe, and then what he did, right, Joe not only wrote another article for the Delco Times, he wrote an article for ESPN.com. When that article hit, oh my goodness, my email went bonkers because everybody wanted to talk about it, because at that time, right, it just happened to be the way things were working. The major leagues decided that they wanted to they wanted to include the Negro Leagues, or they wanted to go back and review the Negro League players and their stats, and then open it up for some of the Negro Leaguers. So what they did was they had a bunch of historians and baseball historians, and a lot of them who knew a lot about the Negro Leagues. And one of the guys, his name was Neil Langtot, and he wrote a book about the Hilldales called Fair Playing with the Hilldales, I think it was called, right? And fantastic book. And I bought that book after I heard about Dr. Langtot, and he was one of the people that was trying to get these guys into the Hall of Fame. Well, I had done some research, and on that list there were 6 players that played either for the Hilldales or for the Philadelphia Stars. And I started an email campaign, and then a couple other articles were written about what we were trying to do, and ended up that 4 out of the 5 Hilldales that were on the list, they got in. They had enough votes. Their stats were good enough. And one out of the 2 Philadelphia Stars got in. And the one Philadelphia Star that didn't get in, his guy's name was Bill Cash. Bill Reddy Cash, right? He played for the Philadelphia Stars, but he played all over the country, and he played a lot down in Mexico, right? He had the stats, right, to get into the Hall, but I think what they did was they hit their limit. I think they had 9. I could tell you, it's actually on my hat. 11. They had 11, and actually got this pin. Where's the camera? I can never get this left-right thing done. There you go. Right. I got this pin from a guy named Ray Mackey. Now, Ray Mackey was Biz Mackey's nephew. Biz Mackey was, he was Mr. Hill. Well, he was a Hilldale. Judy Johnson was Mr. Hilldale. But Biz Mackey was one of the the best players to ever play in the Negro Leagues, right? And when we had a ceremony later on, and he actually came up from Texas to our ceremony. Now, what we did was we went out and after they got into the Hall of Fame, right? We went out and we said, you know what? See, we're going to see if we can get a historic marker, right? So we started campaigning and talking to, and where the field is, it's right in the border of Darby Borough and Yeadon Borough, right? Two towns in Delaware County, and it was kind of funny because two towns that the mayors and the politicians didn't get along. They still don't get along, and that's a whole nother story I can go about, right? And I went and I spoke to both towns at their town halls and their borough meetings, right? And they were all on board. It was fantastic, right? So then what we did is we petitioned the state to get a historic marker, and on St. Patty's Day, which was one of the coolest things in the world because I'm half Irish, right? That they approved the historic marker. Well, then we get the historic marker, and I start working with the Darby Historical Commission, and it's run by this couple who were they are God's gift to this earth. I swear his name, John and Jan Haggis, and the librarian for the Darby Library, Sue Borders, right? And we decided to come up with a plan where we're going to have a huge celebration when we put the sign in, right? So it started out, we were just going to have like everybody up at the field and we're going to open everything. And then, it's like, all right, we're going to have some players come. And then we're going to have this and that and the other thing. And then the Phillies get involved, which was fantastic. We actually had Gary Maddox, and, oh, God, we had three Phillies, and their names are slipping my mind right now, and I apologize, guys. But they had three guys from the Phillies, three players from the Phillies, and they had the director of public relations come. I think his name was Gene Diaz, came up, and we had a huge celebration. We had like 500 people there. We had a parade, and actually we had a parade that came from Yeadon and one that came from Darby, and they both met at the field, which was really cool, And we got to the field. There had to have been, there we go. There had to have been probably 200 kids, which was fantastic. So what Yeadon did for us is they actually painted out in the parking lot, right, the bases for the field. And we had one guy, his name was Ed Bacon, God bless his soul. He was the bat boy for the Hilldales, and then he played after the Hilldales kind of fizzled out, there were a couple other teams that came up, and one was the Darby Panthers. I think that was the team he played on. There was two other teams that played on that field. And he was great. I had him at library talks. I had him. It was funny. He said to me, he goes, no one ever recognized the fact that the Hilldales did anything until we decided that we wanted to get the historic marker. And he got interviewed by ESPN, CNN, Comcast Sports, Sports Illustrated. I mean, he got interviewed by everybody, right? Because he was our connection, our living connection to the team. God rest his soul. And when he passed away, I actually got a chance. They asked me to speak at his funeral, and it was one of the most emotional moments I've had in my life. Next to like my kids being born, me getting married, and all that other stuff that every guys say. But it was a very emotional because I actually got up and I'm in a small black church. I'm Catholic, right? Our churches hold 1,500 people. This church held maybe 200 tops, right? And there had to have been 300 people in the church crammed in, and it was amazing. And I got a chance to go up and speak, And I gave like a 5-minute speech talking about him, and it was emotional because not only did I get a chance to recognize this man, right? I got a chance to recognize somebody who had become my friend, right? And he was one of those people I would call, and he didn't answer the phone, right? I think it was his daughter would answer the phone, and then he's sleeping or something. Get back, and he would always get back to me, right? And he, so guys, God bless Ed Bacon's soul. But other people I had at Hillday, I had 4 players from the Philadelphia Stars, 4 remaining players. They all passed since then. Now remember, this is 2006, but they've all passed since then, and they did everything. They signed. I actually have this hat, right, that they all signed. And this is a hat that we had 250 hats made for that day, right? And we figured we were going to sell some and give some away, right? Well, we ended up giving out 200 hats that day. Just people were like coming up and we're like, yeah, here, and next thing you know, right, it was just kind of like, it was a sea of red hats over at the field. And it was a remarkable day. Even the person who ran the company that I worked for, he came. The guy runs a $3 billion company, and he came out that day, right? Then there's a person in Philadelphia. He's also passed on. His name was Stan Hockman, and he's the guy that wrote this story, right? So the Darby Hilldales, their nickname was the Darby Daisies, mainly because out in the outfield, right? There out in the outfield, there was a daisy garden. It just grew. It wasn't planted. It just grew. And every time they mowed it down, right, they all came back. And this lady, Jan Haggis, at the ceremony, right, she had said that, that every time they tore the daisies down, they came back, just like the daisies now are coming back and they're being recognized. And it was kind of emotional. And Jan Haggis she's a fine person, and she put a little emotion in the day when we were setting everything up. So, but anyway, right. So the day that this ran, right, was the day after the Chicago White Sox had won the World Series for the first time in like a jillion years, right? Huge news story. And this story that Stan Hockman, who was a dean of sports writing in Philadelphia, right? This story bounced the White Sox winning the World Series off the back page. And there was 4 pages that ran with this article and pictures and things. And it was amazing. And to be interviewed by a guy like Stan Hockman, right, who was at the time the top Philadelphia sports writer. Not only was a sports writer, he was on Comcast Sports. He had a show in Philadelphia that the WIP used to be the number 1 sports station in town, right? He if you knew Philadelphia sports, Stan Hockman was involved, right? And somebody that I thought was really cool. But people that I've met since then, they were like, wow, Stan Hockman? I'm like, yeah, I got him on speed dial. And they were like looking at me like, really? I'm like, actually, yeah, I can call him right now if I wanted to. Right? It was, I was blown away, right? But then also along with that, right, after Stan wrote this article, we were being recognized all over the country, right? So, I was interviewed on CNN. I was interviewed on Comcast Sports. I actually went, and it's on my YouTube channel if you guys want to hit it, right? On Comcast Sports, I was on this show called Daily News Live. I was on twice, right? But the one show I was on, actually interviewed me for half an hour. This guy, Mike Barkan, who is, he's been the guy, like, when you start a sports station, you have the one guy, right? That was him, Mike Barkan. He's been on that station probably 30, 40 years, right? and he runs Daily News Live, and he had me on, and it was amazing, and they not just wanted to know about the Hilldales and the parade, they wanted to know what the inspiration was for everything. You know what I mean? And like my inspiration for getting the Hilldales known, right, was mainly, I wanted my hometown to be proud of something, right? Now, Darby Borough, right, the oldest fire company in the country, right? Darby won, right, and they are a historic company, right? And then the Darby Library, the oldest continually run library in the country, right? Darby has a lot of history, you know what I mean? And Darby has gone from being a popular middle class town from the 50s and 60s and mid 70s to not being the greatest town. It's just a lot of crime has taken over, and it kind of sucks. And my goal was to give Darby a day where we all smile and we were proud of ourselves. And I think, working with the Darby Historical Commission and those guys, we accomplished that. And it's been like since 2006, it's been 20 years. And I can't thank those guys enough for everything they've done. I mean, guys like, the Haggises, Sue Borders, Joe Santaguido. If it wasn't for people like that, right, the Hilldale story never would have gotten out. And I appreciate everything they've done for me. Which brings me to the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame. Now, those guys, they did a ton because they actually knew what they were doing and they knew what to help me, right? So they were the ones that helped us get the hats made, right? And we actually have, and I got it over here, we had a historic marker put up, right? But we created this marker, right, that we could take around and show people what we wanted to get done. This damn thing's heavy. And when we did that, it actually put it out there that that we were serious and we really wanted to get this. So we had the historic marker put up, and the historic marker, I mean, it was funny going back and forth because I'm dealing with a lot of like real historians, people at colleges and stuff, that all right, so we wrote out what we wanted it to say, and then we went back and forth 3 or 4 times because we can only fit so much on there. And I wrote like a phone book, because I was trying to get as much information on there. But what ended up happening is we ended up with it saying this. So on this site stood Hilldale Park, home to the Hilldales, also known as the Darby Daisies. The Hilldales existed from 1910 to 1932, winning 3 Eastern Color League championships from 1923 to 1925. They played in the first 2 Negro League World Series, winning the title in 1925 over Kansas City Monarchs 5-1. They smacked them. Bang! They beat them up. 8 players from the Hilldales are now enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Judy Johnson, Henry Pop Lloyd, Martin Diego, Joe Williams, Oscar Charleston, Raleigh Bismackie, Louis Santop, and Ben Taylor. Hilldale owner Ed Bolden also formed the Eastern Color League. Now, we've been trying to get Ed Bolden into the Negro League Hall of Fame, into Baseball's Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, and that's going to be an effort that we're going to really try to get done. But I can say that finally, Major League Baseball recognized those players. And again, I swear to God, every time I do this, whether I'm any podcast, I screw the hat up. But they actually integrated all their statistics in the last 2 years, right? That's incredible, because that is saying that the Negro Leagues were equal two Major League Baseball leagues at the time. Now remember, you had the American League, you had National League, you had the Federal League for a while, right? And, you know, teams when they played, right, it's not like today. Guys actually had jobs, you know what I mean, in the off season because they had to make money. You know what I mean? Baseball, they made a good bit of money, but unless you were top tier, you weren't making the money. It's not like today where like the third string, you know, catcher who all he does is catch in the bullpen is getting paid, you know, $250,000, right? These guys were lucky if they were getting paid like $25 a week, you know. But, and I'm rambling, and I get it, you know what I mean? That's how I do things. But I just want everybody to know, right, that the Negro Leagues, right, were equal to the major leagues. And everything those guys went through, I mean, you saw in the movie, right? I mean, you know, he went into a restaurant, and one, they wouldn't let him use the bathroom. Two, they wouldn't let him come in and eat, but they're willing to make food for them, right? I mean, thank God the cook who actually seemed to be a decent person, you know. But I mean, there were times where, you know, that the hotels they would stay in were burnt down, or they would march in front of the buses and tip the buses over while they were on them. It was insane what they went through, right? And guys like Jackie Robinson laid the groundwork for not just baseball players, right, but for players in a ton of other sports. You know, football was always kind of integrated, but black football players got recognized after this, right? Basketball was always kind of integrated, but again, they got recognized. All of a sudden, like, when somebody's playing for the major sport, right, and baseball was the major sport, basically baseball, boxing, and horse racing were the major sports, you know, from the 50s on back. You know, it set a precedent, right? And look at America today, right? I mean, you know, even though now, right, there's racism on both sides of the fence, right? 99% of the people, we get along, right? And, you know, if it wasn't for people like Jackie Robinson, you know, what would the world be like today, especially in America, right? And it was funny, earlier today on the History Channel, I saw a special, and it was about the Cardinals in the 60s, and how they had, the majority of their team were black players, right? And, you know, they lost to the Yankees, and then the next year they lost to the Yankees, and they beat the Yankees, and the next year they beat the Red Sox. And they were a fantastic team, right? And then, you know, Curt Flood said, you know what, I think I deserve more money. Went to them and asked for more money, and they said, no, we'll trade you, right? And then they trade him to the Phillies with Tim McCarver. And Tim McCarver, right, became a Philly legend for years. But Curt Flood, like, didn't want to go because they had the reserve clause where when you sign with a team, you sign with that team forever, right? And they own your rights. And it got to the point where Curt Flood's like, no, I'm not going to play. And he didn't want to play for the Phillies, which broke my heart, right? But didn't want to play with the Phillies, and he actually left for Spain for a year, right? And then he had a case went all the way up to Supreme Court saying that when his contract was up, right, he should be able to be a free agent. And free agency started with him, okay? And it's just kind of funny that, you know, he didn't go to Philly, right, but he made a major impact on baseball. And then you had Reggie White, right? Because in football, right, free agency was kind of like, and Reggie White left the Eagles, right, because the owner wouldn't pay him, right, and then he was pretty much the first big-time free agent. So, I could go on and on, right, but like I said, the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame, the announcement I wanted to make, is inducting the 1925 Hilldales to the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame this fall, right? And I think it's funny when I started putting out the Facebook posts and things like that for the movie going to be on. I'm going to be hosting it. They got in contact with me and said, "Hey, they're going to be inducted this year," and I'm a voting member, and I voted. I voted for Hilldale, right? Not thinking that they were going to make it, and they are. So they actually have a display for them going on at St. Joe's University. I'm going to try to get up there and see that. There's a display in Radnor at the Delco Sports Hall of Fame. There's quite a few things for the Hilldales and black baseball players there. And it's about time that they not only got recognized in Darby, but they're getting recognized for the Philadelphia area, and they deserve to be in the Sports Hall of Fame years ago. And I'm glad they're finally getting in. So if you guys, they have their thing every year in November. Follow my Facebook page. I'm going to be probably have a ton of things going on and all the different events that are going to hold for the Hilldales coming up as they go into the Philly Sports Hall of Fame. And I like to think that the efforts that I put in and the efforts, again, of people like the Haggises, the Borders, Joe Santaguido, Stan Hockman, they helped me bring the Hilldales legend back to life. All right. Now, I gabbed at you guys for, God knows, probably 45 minutes already. I'm sorry. But I want you guys to know that what my son always says about heroes, not all heroes wear capes. And I'm going to end on this. No, not all heroes wear capes, but this hero, Jackie Robinson, wore number 42. All right, guys. I'll talk to you guys later. Look for me on Friday as my other show, Cemetery Cinema. And on today, Jackie Robinson Day, remember that it always didn't always smell like roses. But let me tell you something. From the crap, roses grew. And look at the world today. We're a lot better off for it. All right? Thank you very much. Look for us on WON Theater. Going to be probably hosting a couple more movies coming up this summer. Thank you very much for walking tonight. And I appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in and watching, right? It's something that not only for us that are adults should watch, but the kids should watch it, because kids don't realize, what America has gone through in the last, 75 years. And we've come out on the better side for it. All right, I'm out. Take care, everybody, and see ya.